Welcome, brave teachers, to the big experiment, which is all about trying to have some science fun with watermelons and rubber bands. But it is a science experiment, and that's the part of it that I am most interested in, I suppose, and keeping it quite scientific. So there's a lot of scientific principles you can put into doing something fun like this. Basically, every school is doing a trial as part of this one big experiment. So there'll be sort of hundreds of watermelons imploded and lots of data gathered, and that's kind of critical to it all. So there are some measurements to take before you get underway. You'll need to measure around the waist of the watermelon, around this bit here, and also measuring the watermelon that way. That'll give you an idea of how round the watermelon is. You can make a little note of any marks or cracks that are on the watermelon. Haven't found they've made too much difference in the past when I've done it, and having it stem side up. So those are some things that you need to do beforehand. Now, the logistics of actually getting started and keeping everyone safe, and that's pretty important because you are going to be imploding this watermelon. Whilst most of the force goes inwards, some stuff does then fly outwards. So in terms of safety kind of equipment, something for the eyes, sunglasses, regular glasses, either old clothes or lab coats or art smocks, something like that is good to protect the clothes of the people doing it. I find it really useful to have the watermelon up high a little bit because you don't want people leaning over it to put things on, just because later, when it does go, very often the top part goes upwards and you don't want someone with their face close to it, obviously, when they're doing it. It really helps if kids work in pairs. Can I have a volunteer come in here for a moment? You'll find if they grab one side of the rubber band and stretch it, and then you go down onto the rubber band, onto the watermelon, thank you very much. That's a much easier way to do it rather than if they sort of try and wrestle it on and they rock it all around the place. So much easier to achieve in pairs. Counting the rubber bands, I've found it much easier to have them in groups of 5 or 10, whatever you like, in a cup. So you give that cup to the pair that are due next, they put on their safety equipment, they come up and they do their 10 rubber bands, and that way you know how many are up to, and someone else can be chalking up the numbers. Keeps good track of the rubber bands, size 64 of course, and it keeps good track of the people around it. It's also a really good idea to have a bit of an exclusion zone, so only the people adding the rubber bands are allowed within probably about 2 meters, and everyone else just outside of that zone watching, or even back over in the same spot watching. Obviously outside is the best place to do it. I have done inside, but it was a lot of cleaning up, so I don't recommend it. It is a really great experiment to film. We're filming it right now. Some tips for filming. GoPros are great because they're fairly indestructible. You can have a GoPro fairly close, and we'll certainly do that. If you've got a camera that does a high frame rate, certainly iPhones do it, and lots of other cameras can have a high frame rate. That basically means slow-mo mode. That'll be really good for the implosion part. Unfortunately, you never know exactly when it's going to be. Sometimes you get warning signs, sometimes you don't. So you can have that set up. Again, if anyone's filming with anything other than a GoPro, something that might be a bit expensive, don't get them too close because it might get covered in watermelon. When you finish, the watermelon that's not on the ground or doesn't get dirty can certainly get eaten. If it is on the ground, composting or putting it somewhere like that would be great. I think that's about it for the tips and the tricks. It's a whole lot of fun to do. The only danger that I've ever found, or the only thing that I've ever found, was the rubber bands, and I'll mention this as well to the kids. The rubber bands, they all whoomp together into a ball. Now, because the forces aren't even, sometimes that ball shoots out sideways, one way or the other. Sometimes it just sort of stays on the table. So that's the one thing that you might notice fly out of the experiment. It's hit me before it's hit other people. It's kind of like just getting hit by a rubber ball. It's no particular big deal, but it is something to be aware of, and that's another good reason for that 2-meter exclusion zone. So best of luck, and remember to send all your results in. Once you finish, you've got to measure the rind as well, get those results and send them in to me.